Hi, welcome to our next stop on our virtual farm field day tours hosted by Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, the College of Ag and Life Sciences, and the outlying research farms. My name is Angie Reek-Hintz, and I'm an extension field agronomist here in north central Iowa. Today I'm at the Northern Research Farm at Kanawha. This is just one of 7 locations where the long-term tillage trials are studied. Those studies have been going on since 2002. Please join Dr. Al Casey and I today as we discuss the long-term tillage trial results. Thank you for joining us. On our drone footage we're currently watching, what we can see is the tillage trial setup at the Kanawha Research Farm. This research plot was originally established in the fall of 2002, and the data I present today will go through 2013. This research trial continues at our outlying research farms. It's located on 7 of the research farms, including the Central Iowa Farm in Ames, the Southeast Research Farm at Crawfordsville, the South Central Research Farm at McNay, the Southwest Farm at Armstrong, the Northwest Farm at Sutherland, the Northern Research Farm at Kanawha, which is what we're featuring today, and the Northeast Research Farm at Nashua. This trial was set up in a randomized complete block design with 4 replications, and the main treatment effects were the tillage trials. There were 5 different tillage types implemented across this research project. That included no-till, where there was no tillage done prior to planting, strip-till, which was a strip-till machine or an anhydrous mole knife used to create the strip, chisel plow to the depth of 6 to 8 inches with a secondary tillage system run in the spring prior to planting, a disc rip operation which was run at 12 inches deep, and again a secondary tillage treatment applied prior to planting in the spring, and then moldboard plow at 12 inches deep, again with a secondary tillage treatment used prior to planting in the spring. In addition to the 5 tillage treatments, the sub-treatments to each of those tillage treatments were 3 rotations: a corn-soybean rotation, a corn-corn-soybean rotation, and a continuous corn rotation. Yields were determined by harvesting the center 4 rows of corn in the 12-row plots and the center 6 rows of beans in the soybean plots. In addition, the soil carbon content was measured at 0 to 6, 6 to 12, 12 to 18, and 18 to 24 inches at the beginning of this study, so we can measure the changes in soil carbon over time. In this slide, what we see is a demonstration of how those plots are arranged at the Kanawha Research Farm. You can see I have the block outlined for the continuous corn block at that particular research farm, and then within that block for the continuous corn, I've highlighted the no-till plots so you can see that they're randomly assigned within the block. And because we took this picture on June 26th, you can still see the residue left from the prior year in the no-till plots. That's what makes those plots stick out in this particular photo. So in today's field day, what I'm going to do is primarily talk about the corn-soybean rotation. I'm going to show you some graphs from all 7 sites, but we're really going to focus on the Kanawha site just to pare this down. And then I'm just going to focus again on the corn-soybean rotation. So before I start going through the data in this slide, the next couple of slides, I want to remind you that this trial not only looked at differences in space or from location to location or research farm to research farm, but it also looked at data over time or over that number of years. So just as a reminder, right, weather influences yield impact over time and over space. So for example, in the graph you're about to see, in 2009, you're going to see that yields in southern Iowa really kind of leveled off or decreased a little bit, but yields in northern Iowa kind of did okay. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that we were really cool that year and behind growing degree day units. In addition, we had a drought in 2012, and that data shows up in our yield here. The southern part of the state, yields really kind of slid downward. And in the northern part of the state, the yields kind of held their own or trended upward right? Those soils tend to be a little less well drained, like poorly drained or somewhat poorly drained at the Kanawha site and at the Nashua site. So even though we got dry because of a drought, those yields tended to increase slightly because those sites are traditionally a little wetter than all the other locations. So we need to take into consideration some of the weather impacts on these trials as well. All right, in this particular slide, you see all 7 locations. You see yield data across the 11 years of this particular trial. You see all kinds of other data on there, but in reality, what we want to show you is that in the corn-soybean system, the corn yield response is highly dependent on location, and it's highly dependent on tillage type. So to break this down a little bit more, I really want to show you what the information looks like from Kanawha. All this data exists for all 7 locations in our research farm reports and some other published material if you're interested in looking at specific data for your farm at a location a little closer to where you are. So let's look at this Kanawha data. Once again, this is yield data. The first thing you can see on there is we go from 2003 to 2013 in our yield. We can see the corn yield in bushels per acre. And then we see this big number there called CV of 12%. That just gives us a variation of what that yield was over time. And in reality, the Kanawha site had the most consistent yield over time, or over that 11-year period. If we walk through that graph real quick, what we're going to notice is that obviously yield changed significantly over years. A lot of this had to do with cool, wet soils at that Kanawha site. But in reality, when we look at those different tillage systems, we see that our conventional tillage systems of moldboard plow, chisel plow, and disc rip all seem to slightly outperform our no-till and our strip till. When we look at the statistics, the conventional till is pretty equal to the strip till, which is great if you're looking at that kind of system. But in general, all 3 of those conventional systems outperformed the no-till in the corn-soybean rotation at Kanawha. We think this has a lot to do with the cooler and wetter soils. I'm not going to make any generalizations because people are going to do the tillage systems they want, but we see a better response out of no-till and strip till in other farm locations, and they all have a little bit better drainage than the Kanawha site does. So this is just an example of some of this data that's shown here. And now I want to highlight the data across all the systems. So we had significant interactions between tillage, time, locations, and crop rotations in both the corn, soybean, which we're featuring today, rotations, and the continuous corn rotation. Those conventional tillage systems were not significantly different than strip till. So if you wanted to move into a strip till system and you were concerned about yield, we could tell you that you would not see a significant difference in yield from a strip till system. However, in the no-till system, at 5 out of the 7 locations, we did see a significant difference in yield between the no-till and the conventional till systems. We'll continue with our corn yield summary. So we talked about the influence of tillage on corn yield. Let's talk a little bit about the influence of the rotation part of these trials on yield. The rotation had an impact on yield across all sites. So the corn-soybean rotation outperformed the corn-soybean rotation, and that outperformed the continuous corn rotation. That's really not anything new to most of us when we see how corn yields in a corn-corn system. It tends to be lower yields in a continuous corn system than in a rotated system. This research just confirmed all of that. In addition, the variability in yield was highest in the continuous corn system, and it was least in the corn-soybean rotation. So we're going to see the influence of that variability a little bit later in this presentation when I talk about the economics. We're going to move on to soybeans. So let's take a look at the regional difference in soybean yields as a response to different tillage systems. Primarily, again, I'm going to focus on the corn-soybean rotation, But in the soybean system, we also had a corn-soybean rotation. Once again, just going to talk about corn soybeans for right now. There's so much data in all this, it's really complicated to work your way through it. So I tried to simplify it as much as I can. When we look at this particular graph, you can see the soybean yields across all of the locations, and you can see the difference in variation of soybean yields within those locations by the CV. The higher the CV, the greater the difference in yield between years. So we just want to take a look at that, knowing that we have that time and weather impact every year. Here we're going to look at the Kanawha slide. So what I tried to do is just break out that slide, make it a little larger, a little easier to read. You can see at the Kanawha location that the CV on the soybean yields was only 14.9%. In reality, that's a pretty low CV, so it was one of the better sites for consistent yields. We can see that across those tillage systems, there is no statistical difference in yield. So across moldboard plow, chisel plow, deep rip, disc rip, however you want to call that, strip till and no-till, we saw no significant difference in yield. So that would lend us to believe that when we want to transition from our conventional tillage systems to a reduced till system, we should not expect to see a decrease in yields in the soybean production system. However, there was spatial difference between farms. There was also temporal or yearly differences in soybean yield. The corn-soybean rotation saw a 9% increase in soybean yield over the corn-soybean rotation. However, that particular rotation, we saw a decrease in corn yield, right? So they kind of offset each other a little bit. There was also a statistical difference in yields between locations, and a lot of that had to do with weather, and it has a lot to do with also soil drainage. So when we look at this data, we can say at 12 out of 49 site locations, we had a statistical difference in yield. What that really means is 37 out of 49 site years, we had no statistical yield difference in the corn-soybean rotation for the soybean yield. So our recommendations might state to you that you would not anticipate seeing that yield difference. In the corn-soybean rotation, 9 out of 32 times we saw a statistical difference in yield across those tillage systems. In reality, that means 23 out of 32, or about 72% of the time, we did not see a yield difference across the tillage systems within the corn-soybean rotation. Across all years, we can take a look at that and we can say, we can combine all the data, or you can go in and look at the data yourself and decide which farm's data might influence your decisions on your farm. Just a reminder, if you have questions during our presentation today, please hit the Q&A button down below. A box will pop up, type in your question, and at the end of the presentation, our moderator for today will work with our speakers to get those questions answered. The second objective of the long-term tillage trial was to look at the economic response. I could jokingly ask you, do you farm for profit or do you farm for yield? And really that's what we're going to see in this particular discussion, is where does that all shake out, both across rotations and across tillage systems. So this slide is very complicated, and I want to tell you that this data was summarized a few years back. Corn prices and soybean prices were a lot higher at that particular time, so that would influence difference in numbers if I were to recreate this chart today. So we go across the top of the table, we see no-till, strip-till, chisel plow, disc rip, and moldboard plow, and then as we go down the table, we see the influence of rotations. So we would maybe expect to see a lower input cost. So these are input costs for corn across production systems. When we look at, for example, the corn-soybean rotation, and we look at the no-till block, we see that the price on there, or the input cost, is $388. So the background on all of this is we used the current corn and soybean prices at that time, which were significantly higher than they are today. So we looked at the custom rate sheet that was published that year to see what the cost of doing business was. So how much does it cost to do no-till versus strip till versus moldboard plowing. And obviously we would expect it to be more input costs on a moldboard plow system because we need more diesel, we need more horsepower, we're probably spending more time in the field, right, to do that tillage system. So that's why you see the differences in prices. At the bottom of the chart, it just shows you the difference between tillage systems. So for example, if we go from a no-till system to a strip till system, we're going to see an $8 value in input costs change simply from the standpoint is it's going to take a little more horsepower and probably a little bit more diesel costs to look at the difference between no-till and strip till, with strip till being having a greater diesel input cost. So all this data exists and is published if you want to study it. I would encourage you to maybe look at the financing on your own farm or financial situation on your own farm. We often forget to look at our labor cost for the amount of time it takes us to do tillage. And in reality, when we try to compare these strip till systems and no-till systems versus our conventional tillage, we spend a lot of time in the tractor, and while our yields may be decreased slightly in the no-till or strip till systems, especially across the northern part of Iowa, in reality we're offsetting that yield loss with the advantage of not doing so much tillage. So that's where we see the economics really come into play. So our economic values or input returns changed by location, tillage, and rotation. We would expect that to happen, right? Our returns for no-till in that corn soybean rotation were significantly lower than chisel plow, disc rip, moldboard plow, and strip till, except at the northwest farm, the southwest farm, and the southeast farm. And that primarily has to do with drainage. When we look at lower soybean yields across northern Iowa, we talked about that for a little bit, that was offset by equal or increased economic returns for soybeans in no-till versus conventional till. We may be sacrificing a little yield, but where we're gaining that economic return is by the fact that we're spending less cost or input cost on the tillage. Multiple years of consecutive corn has also had a negative impact on our return. I don't think this is a surprise to anybody, but it's a positive economic return when we put soybeans into that rotation. So things to think about as we look forward in time on rotations as well. The final objective in the long-term tillage trials was to look at the influence of both the rotations and tillage on increases or decreases in soil organic carbon, right? We look at carbon in terms of soil organic matter, nitrogen influences, and so this is a really important piece of data. It might be not at the top of your radar screen, but folks who are looking at that soil health concept really want to see what benefits they get out of different tillage systems. This particular slide, a little complicated again. It shows all 7 sites and it looks at the influence of carbon in the top 24 inches over those 12 years. What we can see, if I blow this up just a little bit closer so you can see the data coming out of at least the Kanawha site, is what we see is in the no-till tillage system, which are the first 3 bars followed by the strip till, is we see a positive gain in soil organic carbon over that 11-year period. What we also see is a decrease in soil organic carbon in the conventional till systems of both chisel plow, disc grip, and moldboard plow. If this is important to you, that's one reason why a lot of people change tillage systems, but you can see at what rate it takes to build that soil organic carbon up. It takes a lot of years, and in this particular case, we only saw about 0.24 tons per acre increase in the reduced tillage systems, and we saw about a 0.27 tons per acre decrease over that time in the conventional systems. Tillage systems had more influence on rate of gain or rate of loss of soil organic carbon than anything else in this particular study. And when we look at the rotation impact, if I quickly show you that slide again, right, we can look at the rotation impact. So the first bar you see with the A above it under no-till is the corn-soybean rotation. The middle bar, or the gray bar, is always the corn-corn-soybean rotation. And then the final bar in each set of 3 bars is the corn-corn rotation. You can see in this particular case, rotation had very little impact on soil organic carbon increase or decrease compared to the tillage system itself. That concludes the results of our long-term tillage trial, and while I presented only a fraction of the data that's come out of this long-term, more than 16-year trial, and I only featured 11 years worth of data at this particular time, all this data is available for you through the research farm reports. You can go in and you can look at specific sites, you can go look at specific data, and you can pull it out to see what kind of influences it may have on your farm. I want to take a moment to thank Dr. Madi L. Casey, our Professor of Soil Management at Iowa State University. Madi is located in the Agronomy Department. I really want to make sure that I acknowledge all his graduate students and his research techs that have worked on this project over the years. And then thank you to the outlying research farm staff who makes all this work, right? They do the planting, they do the tillage, they do the harvesting, and they're really key to this whole system as well. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Stop 4 on our virtual field day series. I'm glad you could join us today. I want to remind you of a couple of things before we get into the question and answer portion of this field day. Number one, if you have questions, please type them in the question and answer box. It's a little easier for us to track them and keep up with the questions coming in if they're in the question and answer box. And then number two, if you need CCA credits for today, and if you did not supply your CCA number when you registered for this series, please type your name and CCA number in the chat box to the panelists, and we'll make sure that you get your credits for today. Thank you. Madi, we're going to get started with a few questions, and thanks for joining us today. I appreciate you could be here. Let's start with our first question in our chat box today. And if you give me a moment, I'll pull this up. This is from Troy. Troy is asking, in the strip till portion of the trials, were nutrients, I think I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. Were nutrients banded with the strip till? If not, do you feel that would have improved yields in the strip tillage plots?
Thank you for the question, and Angie, thank you for excellent job in presenting overview of the study and cover for me. This is really pretty challenging to compress all this information in a short period. Troy, for your question, this is an excellent question. Applying nutrients, strip tillage invented to start with is really as a nutrient management system. So applying a nutrient within the strip or over a broadcast over the surface. We did a study way back in the 2002, 2003. And whether you broadcast the nutrients or ban them in the strip, we didn't find any significant differences in response to yield to the application or method of nutrient application.
Thanks, Madi. We have a question from Gary. It says, in the carbon sequestration slides, what was the significance of the letters A and B above the bars?
Okay, these letters were placed, and we didn't have time to explain. It's really to separate statistically if there is any significant difference between the treatment, whether it's cover crop or depth or otherwise. So these letter A, if all the letter A, that means there's no differences between the treatment effect. If there's A and B, so that means there's significant differences between the treatment.
Great, thanks, Madi. And I apologize, folks, I didn't get through those slides in detail. There is so much information to talk about in this particular study that I tried to summarize it at a very high level and kind of maybe blew past some of the data.
Sure.
Madi, our next question is from Fred. Why weren't the years after 2013 included? How long has this study been going on, Madi, and is it currently going on, and what's all happening now?
Sure. Thank you, Gary, for the question. The study is going on from, it started 2002 to this date. So we are still continuing the studies. We try to summarize all the data after almost 12 years, 13 years. We thought that's a time we need to release these data. And that's length of time is plenty enough really to inform our farmers and other agronomists about our finding. So we don't wait for a couple of decades and probably we wouldn't be around to report all the data. So this is a time issue, so we could at least the data become relevant to make a decision. The data still accumulated up to this date, and so we have the studies going, and hopefully after 2013, we'll have another go around with the data, analyze the data and see what the continuous trend of yield and carbon after that.
Madi, I think maybe one thing we could point out is the data for each individual research farm is published annually in the research farm reports. So people could find individual year data in those reports, correct?
That's correct. So the data it's available, and we will be working on publishing these data, and also an annual report we submit to the farm management to publish it locally and have it centrally is published in the website at the College of Agriculture under the direction of the director of the research farms.
Okay, thanks, Madi. We have a question from Doyle. What would you expect the fertility and organic matter changes to be with silage cutting and then application at rates high enough to comply with manure management plans in Northwest Iowa? So I'm going to try and paraphrase this. I think Doyle is asking about both fertility and organic matter changes if we're cutting silage, and then maybe if we follow that silage cutting up with a manure application.
That's a good question, which really goes back to the harvest removal. We did a study on that for almost 7 years. That include Dr. Sawyer, Dr. Mallarino in this project. And removing actually residue is going to remove significant amount of nutrients, particularly phosphorus and potassium. And these, it depends on the potassium because it leaches to the soil, its ionic form. But phosphorus is going to be declined on average. There's found about 3 pounds, approximately 3 to 4 pounds lost per ton of stover removed from the soil. Adding manure to the soil is going to help with adding more nutrients. Manure is rich with the nutrients, but it's going to take time to decompose and release these nutrients into mineral form in the soil system. So it's beneficial to add these amendments, organic amendments, to compensate for somehow for the residue removal. But keep in mind, residue, it has really another values, which is stop erosion, stop water runoff, and all these nutrient loss. So the value of nutrients, of residue, not just basically return nutrients to the soil, but also to protect the soil from other environmental effects.
Great. Madi, I want to follow up with the comments about manure. Sure. I think in Northwest Iowa, we see a lot of swine production, so that would be a liquid manure source. We see a lot of dairy production and a lot of cattle production, beef cattle production that would have, that source of manure would be more of a solid system based, right? Any differences in those liquid manure systems versus the solid manure systems from a carbon addition to the soil or nutrient addition from the soil?
Definitely, we noticed, did several studies in different states about the manure application. and particularly swine manure. When you look at the swine manure, liquid manure, the carbon content is very low. But when you look at the beef manure-based or dairy manure, you will have more solid. It's almost 90% solid. Compared to the liquid manure, you have about 3 to 4% solid carbon into the liquid swine manure. So that's the difference where you see the other trade-off with the swine manure. You will have high level of nitrogen, and especially in ammonia concentration more dominant in the liquid swine manure than nitrate. And that's basically just like anhydrous ammonia, if you will. We did some study in Nashua in injecting liquid manure compared with anhydrous. And it's on my website also, the data published there.
Mm-hmm. Marty, we have two really good questions about soil carbon credits. I'm going to try and put these two questions together. Has there been any discussion of using this data to create demand for carbon credits? And then that sort of follow up to that is, do you anticipate that the type of tillage system would impact the potential value of these at a specific farm level?
The carbon credit, it's kind of, there's a lot of effort is going on nationally. There's the NORI organization. I don't know really exactly the spell out of the acronym. And there's also, there's Indigo. Company promoting carbon credits. There's the chain exchange, blockchain exchange also, IBM involved in that. So there is a lot of effort about carbon credit. Now lately there's the ecosystem consortium about carbon credit and ecosystem services. So all these kind of efforts, it's really to create a market-driven carbon credit. And that's basically, there's no set value yet. It's about the carbon credit, but it's still work in progress. And hopefully that will be pushed on the legislative national agenda to promote the carbon credit and compensate the farmers who they are doing conservation practices. And goes to the very question of what kind of tillage system. Most of the carbon credit market encourage the practices, what we call regenerative agricultural practices. And that's basically no-till, cover crop, residue management. All these farmers could obtain credit for using these practices and sequester more carbon in the soil.
Great. Folks, that concludes our questions for today. Madi, thank you for joining us. And also, again, I can't thank the research farm staff enough. I really want to acknowledge Brandon Kleinke and Brandon Zweifel, who did a lot of our footage today for these videos, both the drone footage and the infield footage, and Brent Prignitz as well, who's behind the scenes, pulling this all together and making it look great. I just want to remind you that tomorrow is our 5th and final stop on our virtual field day tour. We are going to be joining Dr. Antonio Mallarino tomorrow, and Antonio will be discussing his P&K by placement and tillage trials. So that, I hope you can join us for tomorrow. I want to say thanks for joining us today. We would all much rather see you in person at a field day, but we can't do that this year. So we're glad that you took it upon yourselves to join us in this manner, and we hope we find this valuable to you. So thank you for joining us today, and I hope we can see you all tomorrow.